The Chicago Bears defense has gotten better in each of the last 3 weeks. There's no denying they're playing well right now. The question is that just a result of bad offenses that they've been playing against, or is this real signs of progress that should be sustainable against better opponents?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. On the show today, we look at the very real progress from this Chicago Bears defense and ask, how legitimate is it? How sustainable is it? Is it a reflection of just circumstances they've been in the last couple of games, or is this something that can carry over and be lasting? That yes, this defense has turned a corner, has gotten better, and aren't just going up against bad or worse offenses than we saw earlier in the season. Because quality of an opponent is always going to be part of the conversation, but it doesn't have to be the whole conversation. And I think there's some really strong signs of growth from this defense, and there's also some signs that like, hey, wait a minute, maybe they have been in some more favorable situations, and then we'll piece together what that means for them moving forward. Let's start with the very real signs of progress. Things about this Bears defense that look better almost regardless of opponent, or even when you go opponent specific, signs that it's sustainable and real and meaningful against the teams that they've been playing against. First of all, across the board, you're seeing this Bears defense consistently shut down opposing running games. They've only had 2 games this season where they've allowed over 100 yards rushing to an opponent. Even as early as week 1 against Green Bay, they did a fairly decent job at keeping them from running all over this Bears defense. But certainly in the last 4 games, the Broncos to 97 yards, then the Commanders couldn't run at all for 29 yards. The Vikings only had 46. The Raiders only had 39. This Bears front 7 is playing the run well, full stop. Like regardless of opponent, regardless of running back, regardless of offensive line, like sure, it doesn't mean no one will have any amount of rushing success against them, but generally speaking, this run defense is legit. They're doing a really good job in terms of having guys set the line of scrimmage well up front, some good penetration from your defensive tackles and your defensive ends. Like this is a much better run defending group than pass rushing group, which we'll get into here in a little bit. And the linebackers are really, really solid downhill. We kind of knew that about certainly Jack Sanborn and TJ Edwards have always been really solid downhill run stopping linebackers. And Tremaine Edmonds has the athletic tools that always make him ferocious in the running game. Like the Bears are doing that very well. The secondary is contributing, but really the front 7 is shutting down running games. And that's the kind of thing that's successful and sustainable against multiple opponents, and you're seeing that really be a characteristic, a feature of how well this group is playing. You're also seeing them increase the frequency of turnovers, right? They're starting to play more aggressive and more confident. Some of that has been from Matt Eberflus blitzing a little bit more in recent games than he had in previous games. But so something about defensive football in particular, but it applies to offense as well, where there's a momentum aspect when it comes to confidence, right? When you start making plays, or when your defense starts playing well, maybe even against a lesser opponent, that can build your confidence up to be able to be more aggressive, to trust yourself, and to play fast and loose, even as the quality of opponent gets better. Like sometimes it can be a lucky interception here or a lucky fumble or something, just anything to kind of give you that boost to say like, all right, we're doing it, we can do it, we're playing fast, we're playing hard. And they've been able to do that the last 3 games. They've had turnovers after struggling to generate turnovers throughout much of the start of the season. And they came in bunches against the Raiders, but they had a couple against the Commanders, got them against the Vikings as well. Like they were able to start having that kind of defensive playmaking that can really galvanize a group. And that's the kind of thing that maybe the turnovers themselves can fluctuate from week to week, but the confidence that the turnovers can play can really start to build some of that up. Plus you have, credit to the coaching staff for being more aggressive from the blitzing standpoint, giving these guys more confidence, more freedom than to then attack the ball in the air. We saw Greg Stroman do it against the Commanders. Jalen Johnson against the Raiders this past week. Guys are playing aggressive. Even when you look like specific games against specific opponents here, against the Raiders, they really shut down Devontae Adams after the first quarter. He had 5 catches in that first quarter, and I think 2 the rest of the game. Really was a non-factor after that first quarter. Took away one of the best wide receivers in football. So some of that comes on the quarterback, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But still, Adams was being successful early on. Bears adjusted. Adams stopped being successful. That's a win for the defense against a really quality individual player. Look at the Vikings game. The defense really only gave up 13 points in that game. Vikings finished with 19. They had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. But you take that away, and the defense was really only a 13-point performance there. That's pretty darn good, despite the loss. If your defense gives up 13 points, you should be able to win any game that you only give up 13 points in if you can get even an average offensive performance on the other side. The Commanders game, obviously a victory. They didn't really give up a lot of points. A lot of drives holding them to field goals, right? The Commanders moved the ball a little bit there, but not a lot of touchdowns. They made guys not named Terry McLaurin have to move the ball for the Commanders. And they did some of that, but for the most part, staying on top of the Commanders offense. And even, in the Broncos game, they had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. The Broncos had a fumble recovery for a touchdown that added points to the defense, right? So the Bears defense didn't give up the full points to the Broncos. 6 of those points were on the offense, scored for the other team. And against the Buccaneers in week 2, 6 points for the other team on a pick 6. So if you even just look at the points allowed, that there's 12 points or 14 if you count the extra points there added on that this defense didn't give up. That goes down as sort of points allowed under the traditional defensive stats. So there's been signs along the way, but especially over the last few weeks of this Bears defense playing a lot better. Guys are settling in. The new players are getting used to playing with each other and playing in this defensive scheme. And you've got guys like Jalen Johnson getting healthier and getting back out there and playing at a high level. The rest of the secondary slowly but surely healing up, and the front seven's been pretty healthy. It's coming together right now for this Bears defense, and it feels good and it looks good, and you got some confidence in what that group's been able to do. It's also been happening against varying degrees of bad offenses over the last few weeks. There's some fluctuation within that, but you might look at that group and say, oh boy, the Bears defense is playing well, but who have they really played well against? Is that anybody that's really scaring you offensively? And they are going to play better offensive teams as the schedule goes around. We'll take a look at, maybe some of the reasons why this has just been a little bit favorable for the Bears and not necessarily something that's going to be sustainable. We'll look at the other side of the spectrum next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the fastest and easiest way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. You got sports, you can get Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks tickets, of course, but also live music shows, comedy, theater events, you name it, they have it at Gametime, and they have a lowest price guarantee that if you find the same seat for less, a ticket in the same row, in the same section for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Looking ahead to the next Bears home games, Bears at Panthers, you can get lower level tickets for $150. Certainly higher level tickets for under $100. I see $81, I think is the cheapest one I'm seeing on the Gametime app right now, and you're going to get $20 off if you use our promo code at checkout as well. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. There's no taking away that this Bears defense has played well. The question is, can they continue to play well when the level of opponent increases, when their play offenses that are a little bit better? Because this last 3 or 4 game stretch has not been the most impressive in terms of the players that they've gone against and the teams and the coaches that they've gone against. And there's some things about how this Bears defense is playing that is fair to question or doubt as they move forward until we see them do it against slightly better opponents. Certainly across the board, even as this defense has played well, we have not seen them consistently rush the passer well. The pass rush is still a very big weakness of this team. Brian Hoyer had all day to throw. he couldn't do anything with it because he's not a very good quarterback. They're not a very well-coached team, and it's not a very good offense across the board. But he, generally speaking, had the kind of time he was looking for in the pocket. Eventually, they started getting to him. They got a couple sacks at the end when he had to throw and he was holding on to it a little longer. But for the most part, Brian Hoyer had the kind of time he needed to throw. Kirk Cousins, the week before that, generally speaking, had the kind of time he needed to throw. Matt Eberflus did a good job of blitzing a little bit more and getting a little bit more pressure with that blitz in that game. But especially when they went back to just the 4-man rushes, because you're not blitzing every time. You're barely blitzing you're barely blitzing 25% of the time, not even in most games. These quarterbacks have still had plenty of time to throw, and that causes problems for defense. Maybe not as big of a problems when it's Brian Hoyer or it's Kirk Cousins throwing to no Justin Jefferson, which we'll get into in a minute here. But it can be a little bit more of a problem when it's there. I don't even want to compliment Jared Goff in this way, but when it's Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions, coming up farther on the schedule, or some of the other teams up and coming, when Justin Jefferson comes back to the Vikings, perhaps later on this season, right? It starts to become a problem when quarterbacks have time to throw and have a good scheme and good weapons to take advantage of with that time to throw. Even with the Commanders and Sam Howell, like they got some sacks on Howell because he just holds the ball too long, but they had plenty of success moving the ball up and down the field. They had 300 yards passing plus in that game. They were able to get some big plays downfield and keep some drives sustaining and going in there. They just couldn't really finish them. But like even against Sam Howell, who's been a lot of up and down with the Commanders, they sort of exposed some vulnerability in there. Like it feels like every game there's a drive where this defense just gets gashed on a few plays and you're like, uh-oh, what's going on here? And certainly against the Raiders, it was barely happened, but against the Vikings, it happened a little too much. Against the Commanders, you got scared. Certainly against the Broncos, they came back and won that game and really gashed this defense throughout the second half in a Broncos offense that has not been very good all season. They're not terrible. They've had some up and down, but like it shouldn't have been that easy for the Broncos to climb back into that game that quickly. When you look about the performance against the Raiders, right? Yeah, they shut down the Raiders' running game, but the Raiders, I think, are the worst rushing team in the NFL. I think they're 32nd in yards per carry this season. They're one of the worst rushing teams in football right now. So is it that impressive that you shut down a really bad running game and Brian Hoyer? I mean, not exactly. You give them credit. I mean, they had to do it. Not every team is going to do it. They get points for having actually done it. It's easier to just assume that they're going to do it, but to say like, yes, they had to do it. They do deserve some credit for that, but are you going to say, oh, great defense or bad offense? It feels a little bit more like maybe a bad offense there. The Vikings game, I think the way they were able to play against the 49ers offense this past, Monday night, lends some credence to what the Bears did against that Vikings offense, holding them to just 19 points, albeit in a loss. But at the same time, it was their first game, their first full game without Justin Jefferson. And so I think some of that was still learning what this offense was going to look like without Justin Jefferson and figuring out how to scheme up Jordan Addison to more success instead of just kind of putting him out there and trying to figure it out on the fly. Like Addison had a huge game against the 49ers, and I don't think the Bears just figured some way out to stop Addison that the 49ers couldn't figure out how to do. They did press the 49ers did press Addison quite a bit and had success pressing him, got an interception when they pressed him, but the Vikings did a better job of adjusting to put him in the slot, move him around, not get as much press, free him up to get free releases from the line of scrimmage, and that's how he ate. So, to me, that felt like the Vikings offense adjusting a bit more to life without Jefferson than it was like the Vikings offense all of a sudden being great or the 49ers defense all of a sudden being bad or the Bears defense all of a sudden being as good as the 49ers defense. I'm not trying to take away credit from the Bears defense there. They held them to 12 points or 13 or whatever the math said there, 12. And they deserve credit for playing well against the Vikings. But I think there's some holes we can poke in the Vikings game a little bit. It's not the perfect example of Bears shut down great offense. I don't think the Vikings are a great offense even without Justin Jefferson, even knowing what they were able to do against the 49ers. I'm not convinced that all of a sudden they're a great offense that the Bears were fully able to shut down in that game. We talked about the Commanders and them being able to drive the ball pretty effectively in that one and not being able to finish drives. The Broncos gashing you pretty well as well. And I think one of the other factors in this is that the defense has benefited in these last 3 games, especially from not only better offensive success compared to the first 4 games of the season, but specifically within that offensive time of possession. Even in the loss to the Vikings, the Bears well outpaced the Vikings in time of possession. They've slowed down the offense a bit, running the ball really effectively in these games, taking care of the ball and not putting the defense in a bunch of bad positions with turnovers, although they did more so in the Vikings game, but still held the time of possession well in that game. And so this defense has been able to stay a bit more well-rested, right? And they're not playing from behind on the scoreboard, right? Where where they can't be aggressive and the opposing offenses become a little bit more one-dimensional. What happens to this defense if this team gets into a shootout? They go against an offense that's scoring, where your Bears offense struggles to score a little bit more, and more pressure goes on your defense to have to make big stops and to stop the opposing offense when your defense doesn't have that sort of cushion behind them. It's not to say that it's going to happen that way, but it's another one of those things where it's like it's easier for the defense to play better when the offense is playing better. And if the offense stops playing better, what will then happen to the defense? Is the defense independently playing great, or is it more of a product of the circumstances of the offense playing well and the quality of opponents that they're playing against, and those offenses not doing a lot to really stress them and challenge them and push them in a way that better offenses in the NFL will start to do? The question that the next question there is like, okay, what will happen against better offenses? But you do start to look at this Bears schedule a little bit, and there's not a lot of really good offenses. I was going to say coming up on the schedule, but like anywhere on the schedule. I think this next game against the Chargers, and then of course twice against the Lions, will kind of be the big offensive tests, and everything else should put this defense back in more favorable positions to play well. So we'll take a look at what's in store for this Bears defense schedule-wise this coming week and over the next handful of weeks next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% sure that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. You just post your job on LinkedIn for free. You get access to the wide range of candidates that are all on LinkedIn, including me, and I'm sure perhaps you and people you know on LinkedIn. And then they've got simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to do daily fantasy sports. And it's the better way to do it because it puts you in complete control of whether or not you win or lose. You put your football knowledge to the test. Unlike other daily fantasy sports platforms where you're setting a lineup and then you got to hope that your lineup is the 1 in 1,000 that beats all the 1,000 other lineups you're competing against, and you really don't have great shot in that kind of matchup. With PrizePicks, you're in complete control. You pick 2 to 6 players, and whether or not they will produce more or less than their PrizePicks projection. If you get your picks right, you can get up to 25 times your money. Like DJ Moore against the Chargers this week, 56.5 receiving yards. Will he perform better or worse than 56.5 receiving yards? You get your picks right, you're going to make some serious cash with PrizePicks. It's a lot of fun. It's super easy. You can make your picks in 60 seconds or less. Try it out for yourself. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and enter in our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's an extra $100 to play with at prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Perhaps the opponent has made life a little easier for this Bears defense the last couple of games, but I think this upcoming Sunday night game against the Chargers will be a better overall test, a better barometer for where this team is right now. I don't think the Chargers are a great team overall. I don't think Brandon Staley's doing a great job. I think he and Matt Eberflus were competing for first coach to be fired this season at some point. But this offense for the Chargers is still pretty good. There's still a certain baseline level of, you have Justin Herbert and guys like Austin Eckler, although I think Eckler's been out, but Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, and of course they drafted Quentin Johnson in the first round. Like, they've got talent, and perhaps one of the better quarterbacks, besides Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback the Bears have faced individually yet this season. Maybe you could make a Kirk Cousins argument, but with no Justin Jefferson, they're certainly the best passing game that the Bears have played up to this point this season all around. The Chargers are, I think, even after last week they played against a tough Chiefs defense. Before that, they played against a tough Cowboys defense, and they're still 11th in points and 8th in yards this season, while also not getting a ton of help from their defense. Their defense has been pretty abysmal this season, which should bode well for Tyson Bagent and company to keep up some of their success. But then the Bears defense, it may find themselves in more of a shootout type situation then. Can they keep up with a higher flying Los Angeles Chargers offense here? Like, for example, you think like, okay, well, the Bears could take away Devonta Adams. Can they take away Keenan Allen and make everybody else beat you? Well, Josh Palmer, who you may not have heard of, not a household name at wide receiver for the Chargers, he had 133 yards last week against a good Kansas City Chiefs defense. Like, they found ways to get other guys involved, especially guys like Palmer had 750 yards last season. It's not like he's a nobody, but if you're not a major fantasy player or don't follow other teams, you might not know Josh Palmer as a name, but he all of a sudden emerged for his biggest game of the season, while the Chiefs did a pretty good job of taking away Keenan Allen. So, like, they've got different options. You can't just take away Keenan and expect that to be enough. You still need to have answers to everything else. It's also the kind of passing game where you can't just stop the run, take away the running game, and expect that, dare their quarterback and receivers to beat you. Well, they could beat you if you try and just focus on taking away the running game, which they've been running the ball decently. Not a great running game, but not a bad running game at all. Joshua Kelly is the lead guy in the backfield now. He's been all right. Nothing too crazy there, but he's sort of getting the job done. And Eckler is back as well. He's been back the last couple of games, so he's a real threat as a receiver and a runner back there. So, like, the Chargers are a real threat here, but they're not the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes just yet either. So that's why I feel like the Chargers can be a really good test for this Bears defense. Do it against a better opponent that's a better offense, where your offense still should be able to get some stuff against the Chargers defense, so it's not all on the Bears defense. Like, they're favorable enough in that way, but not so favorable that you can't give them credit if they're able to shut things down a little bit more, especially when we've seen, Chargers against a good Cowboys defense, Chargers against a good Chiefs defense. If the Bears hold the Chargers to a similar 17-point type range that the Chargers got against the Cowboys and the Chiefs, we can start to talk about this Bears defense being legit and doing it against legit opponents and building some really real positive momentum here from that point. The nice thing is, after the Chargers game, you got a few weeks before there's an offense that scares you. It's the Saints and Derek Carr after that, where they've just been really inconsistent. Some games, everything will kind of come together and they'll look great. Some games, they look very poorly coached and sloppy. And now, Chris Olave got arrested for speeding, not going to be in jail, probably not going to miss time or anything, but just still, like, controversy or distraction on that team, on that offense. And they just, talking to Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints, that offense is not using players properly right now and not putting guys in the best position to be successful. So it should be a little bit more manageable against the Saints. And you got a bad Panthers offense after that on Thursday Night Football, so you should be pretty good there. Then it's Lions, and Lions with Ben Johnson have been very good, although the Ravens kind of exposed them last week, so we'll kind of see what that looks like. But then the Vikings again, perhaps without Justin Jefferson still by week 12. And you look at the end of the schedule, the Browns offense has been terrible. Their defense is great, but offense has been terrible. The Cardinals offense has not been all that great, although Kyler Murray will be back by then, so we'll see. And then the Falcons offense with Desmond Ridder has been severely limited. And then you wrap up with the Packers, who have completely fallen off the rails right now. We'll see by then if they adjust some things. So this Bears defense won't get tested too much more than Chargers and Lions a couple times. So maybe even if the last couple games have been a product of bad opponents, maybe they're just going to keep playing mediocre to bad offenses and they're going to look good for the rest of the season. Like, that's a very real outcome here for this Bears defense. And that'll put Tyson Bagent and then eventually Justin Fields in better positions offensively, where you can run the ball a bit more, rely on your defense, and if they can keep generating turnovers as well, I don't know, maybe your Bears can win some of these winnable games. Certainly the Panthers is one we can lock in for sure. The Chargers, well, it's a little too early to say. We'll see how the injury report plays out this week. I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about what's going on with the ups and downs of this Chargers team. If you come back for tomorrow's podcast, we're going to talk to David Dregmeyer from Locked On Chargers to kind of get a better sense of what to expect from that group, and they've been able to play some good teams tough and lost some other games that they shouldn't. The Chargers are always a messy team, and I'm excited to get the scouting report from our local expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network tomorrow. So make sure you come back and hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Then on Friday, we'll put together a game plan for what the Chicago Bears need to do to beat the Chargers on Sunday night. Monday, we'll recap what happens in the Bears-Chargers game. And next week, we're going to talk to Matt Waldman from Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio. One of my favorite football minds in general. We've had him on the podcast before, though it's been a little while. Matt Waldman was one of the people in the pre-draft process who was very high on Tyson Bagent. Long before the Bears even signed him as an undrafted free agent, Matt Waldman graded Tyson Bagent very highly coming into the 2023 NFL draft. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to Waldman about his evaluation of Bagent coming out of college and what we're seeing out of Bagent out of what will be his first 2 starts by that point when we talk to Matt. So that's going to be a really good conversation I'm looking forward to next week. Come on back for that. Come on back every day. We love our everydayers that are tuning in 5 days a week for your daily Bears fix and your daily opportunity to bear down.